Welcome, everyone. I'm Bruce Ball. I'm VP of Tax for CPA Canada, and welcome to today's webinar. In the webinar today with the CRA, we'll be focusing on the Canada Recovery Hiring Program. And during the webinar, the CRA will be providing an overview of the program and demonstrating their online tools for the program. As you may know, we had opened up a Slido account to take questions regarding the program. And we'll be looking at those today. So the CRA will respond to some of the top questions raised, and we did have some questions come in from some other sources as well. Before we get started, I did want to just pass on some information that the CRA wanted us to highlight. The key objective of the measures put into place by the federal government to respond to COVID-19 is to reflect the immediate needs of Canadians and support the post-crisis economic recovery. As such, there may be updates to the measures after the session is held, and the CRA would like to remind everyone that any potential changes may affect the accuracy of the information shared today. The questions gathered during the session will also be considered by the CRA in its ongoing communication efforts. You can find the most up-to-date information on Canada's COVID-19 economic response plan. On that note, I'd like to introduce our first speaker who will provide some opening comments. Jessica Morrison is the Director of Policy in the Minister of National Revenue's office, and she's going to say a few opening comments as well before we get into the program.
Thanks very much, Bruce, and welcome everyone. My name is Jessica Morrison, and I'm the Director of Policy to the Minister of National Revenue, Minister Le Boutillier. We know that you provide immense support to Canadians and that the past 16 months have been exceptionally difficult. Your contributions to Canadians are significant, especially as we make our way out of the woods of this pandemic and into recovery. Although faced with a challenging and unpredictable year, you have shown incredible resilience, and it remains a top priority to ensure that you continue to be supported every step of the way. On behalf of Minister Le Boutillier, thank you. I would also like to thank all of our public servants who have acted swiftly and have worked tirelessly to put programs, including the Canada Recovery Hiring Program, into place and provide support to businesses and organizations affected by the pandemic. If ever there is anything that we can do to help, or should any questions arise after today's webinar, please don't hesitate to be in touch. Thanks very much.
We're ready to move on to the next speaker, and that's Randy Hewlett. Randy's the Director General in the Legislative Policy Branch and Regulatory Affairs Branch at CRA. Randy's going to provide a general overview of the program. So Randy, over to you.
Thank you, Bruce, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Randy Hewlett, Director General with the Legislative Policy Directorate at the Canada Revenue Agency. We are proud to administer the Canada Recovery Hiring Program on behalf of the Government of Canada. The new hiring program and the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, commonly referred to as CEWS, both support the payroll of eligible employers affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. However, while the CEWS was designed to help employers keep their employees on their payroll during the worst of the pandemic, the hiring program is designed to encourage businesses to hire or rehire employees and grow as the economy recovers. The hiring program supports eligible employers as they grow, whether it's related to hiring staff, increasing shifts, or increasing overall pay. While the CEWS is calculated based on eligible remuneration paid to eligible employees in a claim period, the hiring program is calculated based on incremental remuneration, which is the increase in the total eligible remuneration paid to active eligible employees in a claim period, as compared to eligible remuneration paid to active eligible employees during the base period, the base period being from March 14th to April the 10th, 2021. The hiring program will provide a subsidy equal to the incremental remuneration for a claim period multiplied by a fixed subsidy rate. The subsidy rate is 50% for claim period 17 and will gradually decrease to 20% by period 22. Importantly, while the CEWS has been available for all profit corporations, the hiring program is more focused. For example, in order to be eligible, a for-profit corporation must be a Canadian-controlled private corporation or a cooperative corporation eligible for the small business deduction. Other groups are also eligible to apply for the hiring program, including nonprofit organizations, registered charities, individuals, and certain trusts and partnerships. There are other differences between the CEWS and the hiring program, which are more fully detailed on our website. This is why I encourage anyone who's interested in applying to start by visiting our website and consulting our frequently asked questions. The hiring program and the CEWS will overlap between June the 6th and September the 25th, 2021. During these 4 overlapping periods, eligible employers can apply for either of the 2 subsidies based on whichever subsidy will provide the higher amount. The CRA has developed an integrated calculator that will greatly assist eligible employers in determining which of the 2 subsidies is most beneficial to them. Before I close, I would like to remind you that the CEWS, the Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy, and the lockdown support have been extended to September the 25th, 2021. The CRA remains committed to supporting Canadian businesses, just as we have from the beginning of the pandemic, by putting Canadians at the center of everything we do. The CRA is very proud to have supported millions of Canadian workers and businesses to date in accordance with the principles of our People First philosophy. Thank you. Gary, over to you.
Thank you, Randy. My name is Gary Graves. I'm an acting manager in the Business Returns Directorate with the Assessment, Benefit, and Services branch. The CRA has developed and launched an online calculator to help applicants understand how to access the hiring program. This single calculator integrates the CEWS and the hiring program calculations, and the calculator will automatically show applicants which of these 2 subsidies provides more support for them based on the information they enter. The calculator also includes a printable spreadsheet and statement features that employers can use to view their claim at a glance and enter required information into their hiring program or CEWS application forms easily. We will provide a calculator demonstration later in this briefing. Similar to the CEWS, eligible employers will be able to apply for the hiring program online using CRA's My Business account or represent a client. Applications for the hiring program became available as of last Wednesday, July 7th, and we began processing applications this week, with the first payments being issued during this week. The CRA has added additional checks and validations to the hiring program application to make sure that only those applicants who are entitled to the hiring program will receive it. For this reason, the hiring program will have an automated validation system that will compare the claimant's amounts against a number of key validations. Applications that pass the CRA's automated validations will receive their direct deposit payments within 3 to 5 business days. Applications that do not pass will be manually reviewed before they receive a payment. The time frame for manual reviews will vary based on the extent of validation required, but it is expected that the majority of validations will be completed within 10 days. We want to ensure that Canadians have the information they need to get their applications right the first time. On the CRA's hiring program webpage, eligible employers can find detailed information on how the program will work, who can apply, and how the claim periods will be structured. We understand that circumstances may change or Canadians may realize that they've made an honest mistake. And for this reason, applicants will be able to amend their application through My Business account or represent a client. If you can't find the answer you're looking for on our website, the CRA's business call centers will remain open from 8 to 8 Monday to Friday, as well as Saturdays from 9 to 5 in order to answer employers' questions. The CRA engaged with key stakeholders in the development of this new calculator. In particular, I would like to thank CPA Canada, Restaurants Canada, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, and the Canadian Payroll Association. Input from your organization and other stakeholders continue to be vital and important element to the success of the COVID-19 economic measures that the CRA is delivering on behalf of the Government of Canada. Thanks for your time today. I will now pass the floor back to our moderator, Bruce Ball from the CPA Canada. Thank you.
Thanks, Randy and Gary. Next on our agenda is a walkthrough of the CRHP calculator, which is on CRA's website. To lead this discussion, we have Miguel Borges, and he's a content designer in the Digital Design and Production Directorate at CRA in the Public Affairs branch. Miguel, over to you.
Thank you, Bruce. Hello, my name is Miguel Borges Portes, and I'm one of the leads on the calculator at the CRA. I'm happy to be walking you through the calculator demonstration today. Before we get to the calculator, I wanted to start on the Canada Recovery Hiring Program landing page. As you can see, there are a number of pages here on the website structured very similarly to the wage subsidy, where you can find out your eligibility, periods you can apply for, which of your employees qualify, and more. We're not going to go through all of these today, but I would recommend particularly checking out the Compare the CRHP and the Qs page for a non-technical comparison of the two programs and what's different between them. We will, however, look at this first bullet since it's a question we often get. You can only apply for one of the two subsidies in each claim period. You cannot receive both of them in one claim period or split employees between the two subsidies. However, you can go back and forth between the two subsidies in different claim periods. So please take a look at this page when you have some time. It can probably answer a lot of non-technical questions. Now let's skip over the next few steps to go to the calculate page. The calculate page here is really just an overview of the steps you'll need to take and a reminder that you'll need to print your results from the calculator before going to apply. And there's then an explanation here in an expand hide of the math, how to calculate the incremental remuneration, as well as the CRHP subsidy rates, which are fixed, unlike the Qs. As described earlier in the presentation, there's a 50% rate in period 17, which will slowly decrease until period 22. For now, we're going to go through to the shared calculator for the Qs or CRHP. Although we lose the navigation for the CRHP, you can return at any time to either the Qs pages or the CRHP to get more information about either program. Also, before you begin the calculation, there's a quick optional checklist to make sure you've read particularly the important salient bits about eligibility, which employees can apply. And once you fill that out, you can continue to the actual calculator. There's a choice here. You can choose to use an online calculator or the downloadable calculation spreadsheet. The two options will give you the same calculations. However, downloadable spreadsheet is perhaps better when you have many employees or if you want to easily copy your employee data from one period to the other. Today, we're just going to go through the online calculator, which you can see here. There's a new step-by-step pattern that's been introduced to this calculator, which is now both for the Qs and the CRHP. And the steps are actually quite similar to the old Qs calculator. The first step is to select a period. As you can see, the CRHP is only introduced starting in period 17. So we will use period 17 to demonstrate the CRHP calculations today. The second step is to calculate a revenue drop. As this revenue drop comparison method is fixed once you have chosen one method or the other after period 5 of the wage subsidy, you should just continue to use the same one you have been using in previous claim periods. We're going to use the month comparison method. So here we're going to have a business that had a very small revenue drop of 10% for this claim period. And you can see in the summary here that there's a calculated Qs rate of 8%, which is based on that revenue drop. And there's a calculation here with math that shows you how that number was derived. The CRHP does require a revenue drop in period 17, but it's a fixed rate, as you'll see in the final summary. So there's nothing dependent other than just you have a revenue drop on the revenue numbers. We'll continue to step 3, an important new step for the CRHP. Here, we can indicate if we're eligible for the CRHP. There is a bit more information here and links back to the CRHP pages to ensure that you are or are not eligible for the CRHP. The important thing to remember is that if you are not eligible for the wage subsidy, you are not eligible for the hiring program either. However, the inverse is not necessarily true. You may be eligible for the wage subsidy, but not eligible for the CRHP. If you are not eligible for the CRHP, you can indicate no, and the calculator will still continue. However, it will not ask you for information specific to the CRHP. In this case, we are going to indicate that yes, we are eligible, and you will see that there is an additional step to the calculation for the CRHP. The step here is to calculate a CRHP base period remuneration. That is the remuneration that you paid to employees during a base period of March 14th to April 10th, 2021, that will be used to calculate the incremental remuneration that you're paying now during the claim period. As this base period remains the same for all CRHP periods, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, and 22, you will only need to calculate this amount once. Once you have that calculated in future periods, you can simply input your numbers into the step here and continue without doing an employee by employee calculation. However, since this is the first time we are calculating the CRHP, we are going to click on this link to find the CRHP base period remuneration calculator. This is a standalone calculator. Again, you only need to calculate it once, save your results for all CRHP periods, and it will ask you here to input all of your employees from the CRHP base period. This does also include employees who are no longer working for you during the claim period, and it will also include those who have been working for you and are continuing to work for you. In this case, Mike is an employee who has worked for the business since before the pandemic began. So he has an average pre-crisis or a baseline pay. And we are also paying him $500 a week during the CRHP base period. That is, again, March 14th to April 10th. Note that you should not include any employees or any weeks of leave with pay, that is furloughed employees. However, you should still include vacation, sick leave, those kinds of paid leave that aren't a situation where the employee is laid off but still being paid. We see for Mike that he now has a summary of eligible remuneration. This is the remuneration that will be factored into the CRHP base period. There's a summary at the bottom once you have finished adding as many employees as you need for the base period. And here in the summary, you'll note that you can save it as a spreadsheet or you can print it. There's usually a print as PDF option there as well on most devices. And there are two important figures here that you'll need to keep for all of your CRHP claims. Those are the active eligible employees that you had during the CRHP base period, in this case 1, and the CRHP base period remuneration, which in this case is $2,000. So we're going to take those amounts back to the main calculator. And as mentioned, if you already have these amounts from a previous CRHP base period calculation, all you need to do is enter those and continue. There's a quick summary of the amounts that you entered, and you can continue to step 4 to calculate employee pay. This is very similar in terms of the interface to our CRHP base period. However, note that we are now calculating our employees during the claim period. In this case, we're using an example of period 17, which is from June 6th to July 3rd, 2021. In the example, we're still employing Mike during the claim period. So Mike, as before, was making $500 before the pandemic. However, he is now making $1,000 as we have been able to increase his hours with the economic recovery. In this case, you will see that Mike has both a calculated CEWS amount, which is based on his CEWS rate, as well as eligible remuneration for the CRHP. It's important to note that the eligible remuneration will count towards the claim period remuneration, But as we have not yet calculated the incremental remuneration, which is the total claim period remuneration minus the base period remuneration, that you will only see the actual calculation against the CRHP rate in the final summary in step 6. For now, we're going to add another employee as an example. And Sarah has only been employed with our business since right before the claim period began. In fact, you can even include employees that began employment with your business during the claim period, in which case you could leave, say, week 1 blank, and you could continue to add employment figures for the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th weeks. You will notice in the summary here that as long as she is not an employee who is non-arm's length, she will still qualify for both the Qs as well as the CRHP. In this case, we hired Sarah slightly before the claim period began, so she has all 4 weeks, $1,000. And since Sarah was not employed by our business before the pandemic began, she has $0 in pre-crisis pay. Before we continue, I just wanted to show an example of what would happen for a non-arm's length employee. You can get more on what a non-arm's length employee is in the definitions in the pop-up here, but essentially it would be family members or people who are very close to the management of the business. In this case, you will note that because they do not have a pre-pandemic pay, they will not actually be eligible for either of the subsidies here. Similarly, when an employee is on leave with pay, there is a change in the calculation, and for the purposes of the CRHP, the remuneration from leave with pay, that is furloughed employees, is not eligible for the CRHP. For this example, Sarah is at arm's length from the business, and she is just being employed normally. So once you've added all the employees you need, you can review, download, and print a summary, and then continue to step 5. Step 5 should be familiar. It is identical to previous Qs claims, and note that the premiums, contributions, and deductions only apply to your Qs calculation. They will have no impact on the CRHP calculation. So once we've entered, here we're just using $0 amounts for this demonstration, you can continue to the final summary. Here, you'll note that there's an alert at the top of the summary that indicates which of the 2 subsidies gives you the higher amount, and thus the subsidy that you should apply for in this claim period. In this example, as you get $3,000 in subsidy from the CRHP compared to only $640 from the Qs, you should apply in My Business Account, Represent a Client, or the web application forms using the line numbers listed here. These are all the amounts that you should need in the application form. There's also a summary below that to indicate how the CRHP is calculated. We'll go through that quickly. Because Mike and Sarah had $8,000 in eligible remuneration during the claim period, we subtract the $2,000 of Mike's eligible remuneration during the base period, that's the March 14th to April 10th period, and that gives us the incremental remuneration across all employees for the business. This incremental remuneration is then multiplied by the CRHP subsidy rate for the claim period. In period 17, that is 50%, to derive your CRHP claim, subject to verification. You can print your results here for your records, as well as to make sure that you have a copy when you go to your application form so that you can copy those over. And there is a link at the bottom of the summary that goes back to the CRHP How to Apply page, where you can find your different options to apply. There's also a Qs tab here, which is just for your information in the case where your CRHP is a higher amount. You'll notice that there's an alert at the top that indicates you should apply for the higher subsidy, the CRHP, and there is still a summary here for your information to see what you would have received under the other subsidy. We're going to go back to step 2 to see what would happen for a business with a different revenue drop. In this case, if a business had a 90% revenue drop during the claim period, You would notice that their CEWS subsidy rate would be much higher. Instead of 8%, it is now 75%. If we go back to the final summary, you will note that the CEWS is now calculating a much higher amount for the same employees, Mike and Sarah. This amount is now higher than the CRHP, which is still using the same 50% subsidy rate, so has remained $3,000. In this case, you would apply for the CEWS as it results in the higher subsidy rate for this claim period. You would be able to print this summary and continue to the CEWS to the how to apply page. That concludes the demonstration of the calculator, and I shall pass you back to Bruce for the rest of the presentation.
Thanks, Miguel. That was a great review of the calculator, and I think it will provide a lot of information to people as they start making claims under the program. So the next step in the final portion of the webinar is to deal with questions that have come in through Slido, and also some other questions that came in through other channels. So we're ready to go there, and I believe a few of the CRA people will be taking questions as we go through them. So to start things off, our first question is just a more general one, but it's come in from a few different sources. So the recent edition of the CRHP has created a new consideration, which we just had a look at on the website, in that the greater of the amount available in that program and the CEWS will be available for a specific period that you're making a claim for. But as I understand it, and the questioner as well, they are separate programs, and there is a strict deadline that applies for each of them. So our question is, and this would be when the CRA is reviewing our claims, what will the CRA's process be if errors are discovered on these claims and it turns out that a claim was made in the wrong program? So let's say you made a claim, it should have been the CEWS, but you made a claim under the CRHP.
Bruce, I'm going to let Marianne answer this question. She's from our compliance area, and she's best positioned to give you a response to that.
Thank you, Randy, and thank you, Bruce, and thank you to your members for the question. With regards to the specific of this questions, while I can't comment on hypotheticals and the example provided is missing some information for me to provide a yes or no answer, we can provide some guidance to assist you in cases where you or your client may require adjustments to a claim. As was previously mentioned by Miguel, the CRHP calculator was developed by the CRA with our clients in mind to assist you and your clients with CRHP claims in order to alleviate any concerns with errors whereby an employer claims one program and not the other, and which would have been more beneficial to them. We invite you to use the calculator to get accurate figures. Please note that once the calculations have been done once for the base period calculation, they can be reused in future claims. As you were saying, Bruce, similarly to CEWS, CRHP has a legislated deadline for making claims and or making upward adjustments to claims. As was the case with CEWS, employers have 180 days after the close of a period to submit a claim and or make an adjustment to a claim. Simply, if an adjustment or claim was made within the 180 deadline, the CRA would pay the higher of the two amounts. Past that deadline, the CRA must administer the legislation as written, and therefore the guidance on the CRA website with regards to exceptions or situations where the CRA could consider a claim or adjustment to a claim for CEWS would also apply to the CRHP. With regards to a CRHP claim made by an employer or representative that was not approved immediately to the need to do additional validation of a claim, a CRA officer will contact the employer or the representative for additional information. This additional information would therefore be required to assist with the validation of the claim. To expedite the processing and eventual payment of the CRHP claim, we invite employers and representatives to provide that information as quickly as possible to the CRA. Further, as the CRA has done in the past, and we will update as required the information and guidance provided on the CRA website. Therefore, we invite you and your clients to frequently visit the CRA website for updates. Over to you, Bruce. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Marianne. So our second question, and I think this is a pretty specific one, but on the application portal and again in the calculator, what we were just looking at it, line 300 requires the input of the CEWS amount for the same qualifying period when it's running parallel with the CRHP. Can CRA confirm whether there are any negative consequences if a nominal amount is entered, say $1, for the CEWS, as opposed to going through the details of the calculation? And this would be in the context of an employer who is certain that the CEWS amount is going to be lower than the CRHP.
So this question is for Marianne as well. So take it away, Marianne.
Thank you, Randy, and thank you, Bruce. Again, as stated previously by Miguel, the CRHP calculator was developed by the CRA with you in mind to assist you and your clients with the CRHP claims in order to alleviate any errors. Therefore, we invite you to use the calculator and counsel your clients to use the calculator to input the accurate figures to ensure that employers receive the claims and the correct benefits that they are entitled to. Simply put, Bruce, in order to ensure the correct claim amount, we would invite employers to use the data from the calculator, not nominal amounts. Thank you.
All right, thanks. On to question 3. Let's now, just a bit of background before the question. Let's assume that an employer has 2 payroll accounts. It's one employer though, but 2 accounts. So it's RP1 and RP2. They use one for each business location. So at the beginning of a period 14, let's say, an employee is switched between locations, and therefore the relevant amounts for the payroll account changes accordingly, assuming the employer is using these 2 accounts consistently. On the CRA site, it's stated that you must submit a separate application for each claim period that you are eligible for and for each payroll account that you have. So I think the question coming in from the individual submitting it is trying to just make sure that they don't do something wrong here. So since an application must be made for each account, what steps should the employer take to ensure there isn't an excess claim under the CRHP, assuming that they're otherwise making a claim? And maybe we'll just assume that the only change is the transfer of the individual.
So thank you for the question, Bruce. Just a quick point at the beginning. Please note our website has been updated, and it now reads that unlike queues, submit only one CRHP application for each claim period you are eligible for, even if you have more than one payroll account. Unlike the queues, for which an eligible employer must submit a separate application for each RP account they have, eligible employers that qualify for the CRHP must submit only one CRHP application, even if they have more than one RP account. The total eligible remuneration calculation for the CRHP must be done at the entity level. So we strongly encourage eligible employers who are eligible for both the queues and the CRHP to use the online calculator or downloadable spreadsheet to determine which subsidy will yield the higher amount. We would also note that when using these tools, the eligible employer has to enter its employee pay information at the entity level in order to know which subsidy to apply for. Back to you, Bruce.
Okay, thanks, Randy. Maybe as a follow-up question, let's assume it's the same 2 business locations. They're both controlled by the same person, but let's assume that each separate location is incorporated now. So each of them is a separate legal entity. Is there any considerations, I guess, in terms of the CRHP calculation if an employee is transferred from one corporation to the other corporations? And we'll assume it's just purely for business reasons. And just to follow up, in particular, is a transfer a salary increase, I guess, for the the company getting the employee on transfer?
So Bruce, that's a bit of an application question. So Paul is here from our compliance programs branch, and I'm hoping that Paul will weigh in on this particular question.
Thanks, Randy and Bruce. Yes, we can respond to this question. Just to start off by noting that there were not enough facts in the scenario to provide a definitive response, and so we can only offer some general comments. The first thing that I've noted is the CRHP, as Randy mentioned, is claimed on an entity by entity basis by a qualifying recovery entity, and there's no provision for the CRHP that allows it to be claimed by a group of closely held entities under common control. So if one or more employees are transferring from the employee of one qualifying recovery entity to another qualifying recovery entity, that transfer or transfers will have an impact on the calculation of total current period remuneration and the total base period remuneration for each of the qualifying recovery entities. Whether a particular employee is employed by an eligible employer is a question of fact. We'd also note in paragraph 125.7b that if an eligible employee is employed in a week by two or more qualifying entities that are related, do not deal with each other at arm's length, then the total amount of the deemed overpayment shall not exceed the amount that would arise if the eligible employee's eligible remuneration for that week were paid by a single qualifying entity. And finally, we just want to draw your attention to a new anti-avoidance provision specifically for the CRHP in subsection 125.7.6.1, and it notes that an employer will not be eligible to claim the CRHP for a claim period if the employer participates in a plan that has the effect of increasing the differences between the total current period remuneration and the total base period remuneration of the eligible employer for the claim period. And one of the main purposes of that, or steps or plan, was to increase the amount of a deemed overpayment. So those are the general comments that we can offer in response to that question. Thanks, Bruce.
Well, thanks, Paul. On to our next question. This one's a little shorter. Can we switch between two programs? For example, can we claim the CEWS for period 17, the CRHP for period 18, and then switch to CEWS again for period 19?
So the short answer, Bruce, is yes. You can claim the CRHP for a claim period if you claimed the CEWS in a previous claim period or vice versa. There is no legislative provision which requires that the subsidy you claim in the current period be the same as the one you claimed in the previous period. And for more information on this, I would suggest you look towards our question 21-1 and question 21-3 of the CEWS frequently asked questions webpage.
Thanks, Randy. The next question. I opened my business in August 2020. I have not been eligible for any supports as I was not in operation during 2019. Will I be eligible for the CRHP program?
So the answer is no, unfortunately. In this case, the eligible employer would not qualify for the CRHP unless certain special rules apply and the employer meets all other eligibility requirements. Generally, if an eligible entity commenced operations after February 2020, the entity will not be eligible for the CRHP. As with the CEWS, one of the conditions that an eligible employer must satisfy to qualify for the CRHP is that it had an open payroll RP account with the CRA on March 15, 2020. If an eligible employer did not have an open RP account as of this date, it still could qualify if it satisfied the above noted conditions in certain circumstances, such as a payroll service provider that made payroll remittances on the eligible employer's behalf and that had an open payroll account with the CRA on March 15, 2020, or the eligible employer purchased all or substantially all of another person's or partnership's business assets, and if the seller met those conditions described above. Again, more information on these special rules available on our website. CEWS frequently asked questions, in particular, questions 6-4, 6-5, and 8-3.
Okay, thanks, Randy. Our next question. If the government releases new program information or interpretations on the CRHP, and this would change an application an employer has already made, let's assume, and it's beyond the 180 days allowed for amendments. What can the employer do in this situation?
I'm going to ask Marianne to respond to this question.
Thank you, Randy, and thank you, Bruce, and your members for the question. We can't comment on hypotheticals at this point. That being said, as the CRA has done in the past, we will update our website with new information and guidance as required and as new information is made available. So we invite you and your clients and your also your other members to frequently consult our web pages and our FAQs for updates and new guidance. So simply put, Bruce, any updates to guidance or any change of interpretation would be provided on the CRA website, as well as actions to take should there be any changes in guidance.
Okay, thanks, Marianne. Our next question, and I think we're getting into a couple of more shorter ones here. Will the CRA be updating the wording on the RC 661? So this is the CEWS attestation form to mention that it's both for the CEWS and the CRHP?
Yes, the wording on that form has been updated, and it now reflects that it can be used for both the CEWS as well as the CRHP. And I believe that form was published on our website as of July the 9th, 2021. That is the updated form.
Okay, great. And the CRA had issued some guidance on SHRED, SR, and ED on the impact of the CEWS on SHRED claims. Will this guidance also apply to the CRHP program as well?
Yes, the guidance on the impact of the CEWS on SR and ED claims will also apply to CRHP. That means the CRHP will be considered government assistance within the context of a SR and ED claim.
Okay. And we've got a bit of a longer example here, so I'll just walk through it first and then ask a question. So the company here was incorporated in May 2019. So it was after March 2019. That'll become relevant later when we get into some more facts here. The company filed CEWS claims for periods 1 to 4 using the alternative method. So in other words, the January-February 2020 method. And the company continued to file CEWS claims for period 5 to 13, but now using the general method. So in other words, comparing the to the same month in the prior year to calculate the revenue drop. The company is looking to file a CEWS claim for period 14, which is based on revenue earned in March 2021. The company cannot use, though, the regular method because March 2019 was before it was incorporated. So the question really is, can the company use the January-February 2020 method as the prior reference period doesn't really apply for period 14? Or if not, what should they do?
So no, in this case, the company can't use January and February of 2020 as the prior reference period for period 14. As you're aware, there are 2 available approaches to determine revenue reduction: the general year-over-year approach and the alternative approach. The applicable prior reference period for a claim period will depend on the approach that an eligible employer chooses. Where the eligible employer is using the alternative approach for claim periods 1 to 4, as in this case, it can elect to continue to use the alternative approach for claim periods 5 to 20, or it can apply the general approach for claim periods 5 to 20. Once an approach is chosen, the eligible employer must use the same approach for claim period 5 and subsequent claim periods. The CRA is aware of the issue and the concerns raised in the question, and we have brought it to the attention of Department of Finance. So we would encourage you to check the CRA website regularly for any updates to our policies, guidelines, and questions and answers.
Well, thanks, Randy. That's helpful in terms of the fact it's been passed on to finance as well. So something for us to watch for. So on to the next question here. If an employee was employed in period 14, but is not in period 17, does his or her remuneration need to be included in the base remuneration for the CRHP calculation? And is the comparison of the base to the current period remuneration done without taking into consideration, I should say, whether the same employees are present in both periods?
So the answer to both questions is yes. There's no requirement that an employee employed with an eligible employer in the base period continues to be employed in the current claim period and vice versa. The eligible remuneration paid to an eligible employee, subject to certain limits, during the base period who is no longer employed with the eligible employer in the current period must be considered in the calculation of the total base period remuneration. And I believe Miguel went through that in the calculator as well. Similarly, eligible remuneration paid to an eligible employee subject to certain limits again in the current claim period who was not employed with the eligible employer during the base period will be considered in the calculation of the total current period remuneration. The two amounts are calculated independently.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Next question, and we have 3 left now. We use consolidated financial statements. Can we claim one legal entity under the SUS, but another legal entity under the CRHP for the same claim period?
So the response is yes. When a group of eligible employers prepares consolidated financial statements and each member of the group determines its qualifying revenue in accordance with those statements, it is possible that the subsidy calculation may result in one or more eligible employers in the group claiming the Qs, while another the CRHP for the same period. Qualifying revenue for the CRHP has the same meaning as for Qs. The special rules that apply to calculating the qualifying revenue for the Qs also apply for the CRHP. And of course, it's important to remember that the claim for the subsidy is at the entity level, even though a group who uses consolidated financial statements may use the consolidated financial statement method for determining their qualifying revenue.
Okay, thanks. And I think you've talked to this, but maybe I'll ask the question just so you can maybe just discuss it a little more generally. Will CRA be developing FAQs for the CRHP similar to what it's done for the SUS program?
So we won't be developing FAQs specifically for the CRHP in the same manner as for the Qs. As you're aware, many of those Qs questions also apply to the CRHP because of the way the legislation is structured. It should be noted that most of the rules, are the same. And, we have, however, developed a set of 25 Q&A specifically on the CRHP, which can be found on our web pages in the areas related to budget information. We can follow up and provide you with those links specifically if you would like. But they're also embedded in our calculator information. When Miguel done the demonstration, he may have hit on those, and if not, maybe Miguel, you can show on the screen now where those FAQs are located, or the questions for this particular subsidy. There you go. So in the area under who can apply, there's under technical, it says technical Qs and As, and there are 25 questions or so there that relate specifically to CRHP.
Okay, great, thanks. So our last question, and this is more of a general one, given the connection between the two programs that we've discussed extensively today, can the CRA comment on any issues and trends that they've seen during their review of the SUS claims? And I guess in particular, can the CRA share any insights as to common errors, discrepancy, or interpretation issues that they've identified that may help, I guess, taxpayers and their advisors making future claims?
So I'm going to give the last word to Marianne here, Bruce, as she works in the area reviewing these claims, or will be reviewing these claims.
And thank you, Randy, and thank you, Bruce, and once again to your members for all these questions. I'm hoping that it's very helpful to them. Specifically with regards to queues, throughout the life cycle of the program, the CRA has frequently updated its web pages and FAQs that are available online with new information and guidance. And we invite you and your clients to consult that information regularly to stay on top of any changes. Further, as Randy has mentioned, and as I've mentioned a little earlier, as we have done for queues, the CRA will update our website with new information and guidance for the CRHP as required and as new information is made available. So we invite you and your clients to once again frequently consult our web pages for any updates and new guidance with regards to both queues and the CRHP. Thank you, Bruce.
Okay, thank you. Just want to do a quick wrap up. Well, first of all, I want to again thank CRA for participating in another joint session with us. We've done a number of these now, and we've received really good feedback. So I really appreciate again the efforts of the CRA with the new program, the hiring program. So thank you, and we really appreciate it. I also want to thank everyone who is watching the session. We appreciate as well that a number of you have taken a lot of interest in our site and have been connecting with us over the course of the pandemic. So again, we thank you for viewing the session. And I also wanted to mention if there are any further questions or issues, and maybe it's a follow-up question to something that was discussed today. There is going to be information on the site in terms of how you can contact us, and we're going to continue what we've been doing during the pandemic, which is forwarding questions that do arise to CRA, and Randy knows that most of the time I've been sending them to him, but we have been sending queries along where we think there's something that would be of interest to people and something where CRA interpretation would be useful. So we will continue to follow up with CRA on these issues and others as they arise, and we'll continue to post updates on our website as well, including the CRHP, but on other issues as well related to the pandemic and just tax issues in general now. So that's available on the CPA Canada tax update site. So thanks again to everyone, and until next time, again, please keep an eye on our site. We'll continue to provide updates. Thanks a lot.